in the quiet village of Arin, where life moved slowly between dusty roads and crumbling houses. A single announcement shattered Mira's fragile world. She was being forced to marry a man the villagers only knew as a filthy, homeless beggar. As the wedding preparations unfolded without her consent, she felt her heart tighten, believing fate had finally abandoned her completely. But the moment she saw him for the first time, with his torn clothes and unshaven face, something didn't match the image people painted. Behind the dirt and silence were eyes that held a strange calmness, almost like someone who had seen more of the world than anyone here could imagine. Still, nothing eased the humiliation that surrounded her. Mira was an orphan, raised by relatives who saw her only as unpaid labor, someone easy to control and easier to discard. Her uncle, drowning in debt, decided she was the quickest way out of his troubles, handing her life over to a man with no home, no family, and no value in the eyes of the village. As she stood trembling in the village hall with people whispering that her life was finished, Mira's thoughts raced through every dream she ever had, dreams of studying, working, and building a life she could be proud of. Now, all of it seemed to collapse like fragile glass. The beggar, however, didn't mock or pressure her. Instead, he lowered his gaze in quiet respect, as if he understood her fears, and when their hands touched for the ceremonial agreement, she felt an unexpected steadiness in his grip, something that made her chest tighten with confusion. Why did a man who supposedly had nothing hold himself with such quiet dignity? Why did his presence feel more controlled, more thoughtful than any of the wealthy men she had met? Unaware that her forced marriage was the beginning of a destiny far greater than the pain of this moment, Mira stepped into a bond that would unravel secrets powerful enough to change her life forever, because the beggar she believed would ruin her future was actually the key to a world she never imagined she'd belong to. Mira first heard about her fate not from family, but from the whispers of neighbors. She was sweeping the courtyard when two women passing by pressed their heads together and muttered, "That poor orphan girl, forced to marry that beggar. What sin did she commit?" The broom froze in her hand. For a moment, the sound of clucking chickens and distant market cries faded. Then her uncle's voice cut through the air, calling her inside. His face was hard, lines of worry carved deep into his forehead, but his eyes held no affection, only cold calculation. "You're old enough to be useful," he said flatly. "A man has agreed to marry you." Mira's heart stirred with a tiny spark of foolish hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to escape the constant insults, the endless chores, the feeling of being unwanted. "Who is he?" she asked carefully. Her aunt laughed, a short, cruel sound. "You should be grateful someone wants you at all. He's a beggar from the streets. No family, no property, no dowry needed." The room tilted as her hope shattered. She tried to protest, but her uncle's hand slammed on the table. "Do you think we're running a charity here? I have debts to pay. He paid for you with what little he has. You belong to him now." That night, Mira lay awake on the thin mat, staring at the cracked ceiling. Outside, the village of Arin slept under a quiet sky, but inside her, a storm raged. Was this all her life would be traded like an object to remove someone else's burden? A single tear slid down her cheek. She clasped her hands together, whispering to the darkness, "If there is any mercy in this world, please, don't let this be the end of my story." The wedding day came faster than Mira could breathe. There were no colorful decorations, no joyful music, no friends giggling around her as she dressed. Her aunt shoved her into an old, faded red sari that had once belonged to a distant cousin. The fabric was fraying at the edges, and the bangles on her wrists clinked loosely, borrowed and mismatched. "Don't cry," her aunt snapped as Mira's eyes glistened. "No one likes a bride with swollen eyes. At least pretend you're happy." But how could she pretend when every step toward the small village hall felt like walking toward a prison cell? When they arrived, a crowd had already gathered, not out of love, but curiosity. Children pointed and whispered. Men smirked. Women shook their heads with fake pity. Then Mira saw him. Arin stood near the front, wearing a washed but still worn out. His beard was uneven, his hair messy, and his sandals looked like they would fall apart any second. The villagers called him names behind his back. Trash, useless, curse of the village. Yet, as Mira's eyes met his for the first time, she saw something unexpected. Not arrogance, not cruelty, but a quiet, steady sadness. The ceremony began. The village priest muttered the rituals, slightly annoyed at being called for such a cheap wedding. Someone snickered loudly. "Even beggars can marry now. I see." Mira's fists tightened around the edge of her sari. She wanted to disappear. When it came time for Mira and Arin to join hands, her fingers trembled. She expected his grip to be rough, careless. Instead, it was firm but gentle, as if he was silently saying, "I know you didn't choose this either." For a heartbeat, the noise around them faded. Then the priest declared them husband and wife, and a wave of laughter, gossip, and judgment washed over them. Mira lowered her gaze, swallowing the bitter taste of humiliation, unaware that the story everyone mocked that day would one day be the tale they all envied. After the ceremony, there was no grand feast, no decorated car, no warm welcome. Mira's uncle handed Arin a small cloth bag with a few stale flatbreads, as if he were sending off a servant rather than a niece. "She's your responsibility now," he said sharply, glad to be rid of her. Without complaint, Arin nodded and turned to Mira. "Come," he said softly. His voice surprised her. It was low, calm, and careful, like someone who weighed every word before speaking. They walked out of the village, away from the chatter and stares, toward the outskirts where the houses grew smaller and more broken. Finally, they stopped in front of a tiny hut made of old wood and sun-baked mud. The roof looked tired, patched with straw and plastic sheets. A cold wind slipped through the cracks. "This is home," Mira whispered, her heart sinking even further. "For now," Arin replied quietly. He opened the door and stepped aside, letting her enter first. Inside, there was very little a single bed with a thin mattress, a worn-out trunk, a clay stove in one corner, and a rusty lantern hanging from a nail. It was cleaner than she expected, but still painfully bare. Mira set her small bundle of clothes on the trunk, her mind spinning. So this was her new life. No family, no security, no future. She understood. Just a hut at the edge of the world, with a man she barely knew. As evening fell, Arin lit the lantern and placed a plate of the stale flatbread in front of her. "You eat first," he said. "I'm not hungry," she lied automatically. He didn't argue, just broke a piece and handed it to her with patient eyes. When it was time to sleep, he spread an old mat on the floor and gestured toward the bed. "You take it," he insisted. "I'm used to sleeping anywhere." Mira hesitated, confused. This wasn't what she expected from a husband she'd been forced to marry. No shouting, no demands, no claim over her only distance. And an odd, quiet respect she couldn't understand. Days began to blur into one another. Mira woke up before sunrise, out of habit, and started tidying the small hut. She cooked simple meals with whatever she could afford from selling small handicrafts in the market, a skill Dee learned to survive at her uncle's home. Arin, however, had a routine that didn't fit the image of a helpless beggar. Every morning, as the first light crept over the fields, he washed his face and hands thoroughly at the small water pump outside, then disappeared without a word, carrying a cloth bag over his shoulder. He wouldn't return until afternoon or sometimes evening, but he never smelled like someone who had spent the whole day begging under the sun. Sometimes he brought back fresh vegetables, sometimes medicine for someone sick in the neighborhood, sometimes neatly folded papers he kept safely in the trunk. One afternoon, when he was late, Mira's curiosity finally pushed past her. She opened the trunk just a little, intending only to check if he had food stored there. But instead of scraps of cloth or old bowls, she saw neatly stacked notebooks, a sleek pen that looked too expensive for their life, and envelopes sealed with symbols she didn't recognize. Before she could look closer, the door creaked. Mira jumped back, heart pounding. Arin stood there, surprised to see the trunk slightly open, but he said nothing. He simply walked over, closed it gently, and gave her a small, understanding smile. "If you ever need anything, just ask," he said softly. His calm reaction unsettled her even more. Later that night, Mira pretended to sleep and watched him under half-closed eyes. He sat by the lantern, writing carefully in one of the notebooks, his handwriting elegant and controlled. Who had taught a beggar to write like that? And why did he sometimes whisper in a language she didn't recognize when he thought she wasn't listening? The more she observed, the less sense her marriage made. Arin was poor, yes, but he moved and spoke like a man who once belonged to a completely different world. The village did not let Mira forget who they believed her husband was. When she went to the market, people pretended to smile, but poisoned their words with pity. "How are you, dear?" one woman asked loudly. "Must be so hard, living with someone who begs for coins." Another laughed. "At least she'll never worry about getting robbed. No thief wants what they have." Mira kept her eyes down, clutching her small basket, cheeks burning. She could bear their insults about her. She'd heard them her whole life. But now, their words stabbed deeper because they weren't. Teachers mocking her, they were tearing at the only person who had shown her kindness without asking for anything in return. One afternoon, as she returned home, she saw a group of boys throwing stones near the hut. Her heart jumped. "Stop it," she shouted, rushing forward. The boys scattered, but not before she heard one of them say, "We were just having fun. It's just the beggar's house." Rage, unfamiliar and hot, rose in her chest. When Arin came back later, he found her patching a crack in the wall where one of the stones had hit. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Mira hesitated, then finally let the truth spill out about the boys, the whispers, the cruel jokes in the market. "They think you're nothing," she said, voice shaking. "They think I'm nothing for being with you." Arin listened silently, his jaw tightening for the first time. "And what do you think?" he asked, meeting her eyes. Mira swallowed, surprised by her own answer. "I think they don't know you at all." "And maybe neither do I for a moment." Something flickered in his expression, pain, gratitude, and a hint of relief. "One day," he murmured, "you'll understand everything. Until then, I'm sorry. You have to endure this." It was the first time she realized he carried a weight too, one he never talked about, and slowly, without planning to, she began standing a little straighter in the village, no longer letting people mock him without seeing fire in her eyes. It was late afternoon when chaos shattered the peaceful rhythm of the village. Mira was at the well, drawing water, when she heard panicked shouts coming from the main road. "Help! Someone stop them!" a voice cried. Dropping the bucket, she ran toward the noise, along with a crowd of villagers. On the dusty road just outside Arin, a sleek black car unlike anything the village usually saw stood at an awkward angle. Its door was flung open, and a well-dressed man lay on the ground, shielding his head as two masked men tried to snatch his briefcase. The villagers kept their distance, afraid. No one wanted to get involved. Mira scanned the crowd for Arin, but he was nowhere in sight. Then, like a shadow breaking away from the trees, he appeared. Without hesitation, Arin sprinted toward the attackers. The villagers gasped. What could a poor beggar do against armed thieves? But Arin moved with a speed and precision that made Mira's heart stop. He dodged a swinging metal rod, grabbed the attacker's arm, and twisted it behind his back in a move so sharp and skilled it looked like something from a movie. The second man rushed forward, but Arin kicked the briefcase out of his hand and sent him stumbling backward. Within seconds, both attackers fled into the fields, leaving the briefcase behind. The well-dressed stranger stood up, shaking, brushing dust from his expensive suit. He turned to Arin with wide eyes. "Sir," he began in a formal tone, then stopped himself. Mira heard it clearly. "Sir. Not you, beggar, or you fool. Sir." The man's gaze moved over Arin's clothes, confusion battling with recognition. "Is it really you?" he whispered, almost in disbelief. Arin stiffened, glancing quickly at the watching villagers. "Not here," he murmured in a low voice. Moira's pulse raced. Why was this rich stranger speaking to her husband like he was someone important, someone he'd known before? Nothing about this moment felt ordinary anymore. The rescued man insisted on coming to the hut to thank Arin properly. The villagers trailed behind at a distance, buzzing with gossip. Mira walked beside Arin, stealing glances at him. His shoulders were tense, his eyes sharper than she'd ever seen them, scanning every corner like he was used to being watched. Inside the hut, the rich stranger bowed his head, slightly bowed. "To her husband, and said, in a respectful tone, 'Mr. we've been searching for you for months.'" Myra's world tilted. Mr. The name felt foreign yet heavy, like it belonged on office doors and company buildings, not on the lips of a man in a dusty village hut. "You're mistaken," Arin replied calmly, but Mira heard the strain beneath his voice. "I'm just Arin. I live here now." The man's eyes flickered with desperation. "Sir, the board is in chaos. Your disappearance put everything at risk. Your father's legacy, Arin Essihan, shut you up," and the man fell silent. Mira stood frozen near the doorway, her breath shallow. "Please," Arin said quietly but firmly, "don't speak of this here." His gaze slid briefly to her, and she saw at last layers of secrets he'd been hiding, not just from the world, but from her. After the man left, promising to return, Mira and Arin were alone again. The silence stretched between them. Finally, she couldn't hold it in any longer. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Really?" Arin sank onto the edge of the bed, rubbing his forehead. The mask he'd worn for so long seemed to crack. "I never wanted you to find out like this," he said softly. not through fear and confusion. Anger and hurt rose in Mira's chest. You let me believe you were a beggar. You let them insult you. You let them insult us. His eyes met hers, full of guilt. Because I needed to know, he replied, voice barely steady, if there was anyone in this world who could see me without the money. That night, Arin finally told Mira who he really was. They sat in the dim glow of the lantern, the hut suddenly feeling too small to hold the weight of his truth. My full name is Arin Devron, he began quietly. My family owns Devron Enterprises, a group of companies that deals in technology, real estate, hospitals, a lot of things. Mira's head spun. She had heard that name whispered on the crackling radio in her uncle's house, attached to big city projects and charity donations. Devron wasn't the name of a beggar. It was the name of someone whose decisions shaped entire cities. When my father died, Arin continued, I inherited everything. Money, power, expectations. People around me began to change. Friends, relatives, even strangers, all of them wanted something. No one looked at me without calculating how I could benefit them. His eyes grew distant, remembering I was surrounded by people, but I had never felt more alone. I started wondering if there was anyone left who could look at me and not see a walking bank. He explained how he had created a new identity, leaving the city in a quiet, planned disappearance. He dressed simply, lived like someone with nothing, and moved from place to place, studying how people treated him when they thought he had no value. Most looked through me, he said. Some were cruel. A few were kind, but only for a moment. When he arrived in Arin, he expected more of the same mockery, coldness, indifference, and he got it. But then there was Mira. You were different, he said, turning to her. Even before the marriage, I saw you helping others, sharing your small food, comforting children who weren't yours. Then your uncle tried to sell you to me like a solution to his debt. I accepted not because I wanted to own you, but he hesitated, ashamed, because I thought if someone could still show kindness to a man like me, even in this disguise, then maybe I'd finally find something real. Mira sat in stunned silence as Arin's confession echoed through the small hut. A part of her wanted to scream, to accuse him of playing with her life, her pain, her reputation. Another part quaita, but stubborn couldn't ignore how gently he had treated her from the very beginning. So this marriage, she finally managed, her voice trembling, was a test? Arin flinched. No, he said quickly. At least it wasn't supposed to be. Your uncle gave me no time to think. He pushed you into this without your consent. That's something I can never forgive him for, nor myself for accepting. He stood and opened the trunk, pulling out a neat envelope with official-looking papers. I had these prepared weeks ago, he said. Annulment papers, a way to free you if you ever wanted to leave. The word leave hung in the air like a question neither of them knew how to answer. You mean, Mira whispered, I can walk away? Just like that? Yes, Arin replied. You can take a settlement, a home, an education, anything you want. And you never have to see me again. You deserve the right to choose your own life, something that was stolen from you. Tears burned Mira's eyes, not just from pain, but from the overwhelming rush of finally being given a choice. She thought of the village, of their laughter, their cruelty. She thought of Arin's small, steady gestures the way he gave her the bed, never raised his voice, never touched her without permission. She thought of how he had risked his life to save a stranger, how the rich man had bowed to him. If I go with you, she said slowly, to this world of yours, will I still be the girl they called the beggar's wife? Arin shook his head, a faint, hopeful smile tugging at his lips. You'll be whoever you choose to become. And if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel unwanted again. Mira stared at the unsigned papers. For the first time ever, her future wasn't a cage built by others. It was a door, and her hand was finally on the handle. In the weeks that followed, everything changed, and yet, in the most important ways, nothing did. Arin's real world revealed itself one step at a time. First came the sleek car, waiting at the edge of the village. Then the respectful nods of his staff as he and Mira arrived in the city. Towering glass buildings bore the Devon name in shining letters. Inside, people paused mid-conversation, eyes widening when they saw their missing heir walk through the doors dressed in simple clothes. Holding the hand of a quiet village girl, Mira felt small at first, overwhelmed by polished floors, busy elevators, and walls of framed awards. But every time her fear threatened to swallow her, Arin squeezed her hand gently, an anchor amid the chaos. You belong nowhere less than anyone here, he whispered. He introduced her not as someone he pitied, not as a secret, but as his wife. The board members were stunned, some displeased, others curious. Yet none dared openly disrespect her when they saw the calm certainty in Arin's eyes. Slowly, Mira began exploring this new world. She enrolled in classes, learning about business, reading books she never had access to before. Her sharp mind, once ignored, now found endless things to absorb. One day, she stood before a large window in Arin's office, looking out over the city. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Leaving all this behind, pretending to be poor?" Arin shook his head. "If I hadn't," he said, "I would never have found you." In time, he kept another promise too. They returned to Dara not with arrogance, but with purpose. Arin bought land and built a community center there, with classrooms, a small clinic, and a shelter for orphans like Mira once was. The villagers stared, mouths open, as the beggar came back as the billionaire they had unknowingly scorned. But Mira didn't he look at them with revenge, walking through the village in a simple but neat dress. She smiled softly, greeting everyone with the same kindness she had before. Only now, when they looked at her, they saw not a burden, not a mistake, but a woman who had risen beyond their judgments. That night, as she and Arin stood under the stars, outside their old hut now rebuilt, and preserved as a reminder, Mira whispered, "I was forced into this marriage. But staying in it, choosing you, that was mine." Arin wrapped his fingers around hers. Their hands, once joined by pressure and fear, were now bound by trust and choice. Far from being the end of her story, the day she married a homeless beggar had been the beginning of a life richer than she had ever dared to dream. Mira often thought back to the day she stood trembling in the village hall, believing her life had ended the moment she was forced to marry a man the world mocked. Yet now, as she walked beside Arin through the shining halls of their new life, she understood something she never could have imagined. Then that destiny had not punished her. It had rescued her. She had stepped unknowingly into a marriage built from fear and desperation, but it had transformed into a bond forged from trust, respect, and choice. Mira no longer carried the identity of the poor orphan girl or the beggaress bride. She was a woman who had found her own voice, her own strength, and a partner who cherished her not because of wealth or status, but because she had always seen with her heart. Together, they turned their pain into purpose, building homes for children like her, offering hope to families like the one she once longed for. And every evening, when the sun dipped below the skyline and the city lights flickered to life, Mira would look at Arin and smile, knowing that the world had tried to bury her, but instead, it had planted her in the one place where she could finally grow. Their story began with force, but it blossomed into freedom, proving that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful destinies.